Okay, let's do the next section. Let me know if any questions came up from measuring your workspace's speed. Next up, we're going to cover batch processing. I think this actually might be an area of this course we might expand in the future because we tend to get a lot of interest in it when we talk about it, but it's a pretty small little section of the course here. We don't actually have an exercise either. But yeah, let me know if this is something you're already doing or interested in doing. Maybe we'll expand on it a bit in the future. But I did want to talk about it because it is pretty commonly used among our customers. Batch processing is generally running the same workspace on multiple source data sets. I think the important thing to note is that, again, people seem to think this might be a bit of a panacea for performance improvements, and it's not always going to give you performance improvements. Again, it sort of depends on the situation. But there's actually quite a few ways you can run a workspace. So I did want to just provide a bit of an overview of that because I think some people aren't maybe aware of the different ways you can run a workspace. You can, of course, run a workspace with Workbench, which is what we've been doing in this course mainly. You can use FME Quick Translator, which is a tool that just lets you run a workspace on your desktop, and you can use user parameters, etc., but it doesn't require opening Workbench. You can run workspaces from the command line, either through a batch file or a command file. You can use the batch deploy option from within Workspace, from within Workbench. You can use the workspace runner transformer. I guess you used to be able to use the FME Flow job submitter transformer, or is that still a thing? That didn't also get removed in 24.2, did it? No, that one still exists. Cool. So yeah, you can use that to run a workspace on Flow from FME Workbench. And then, of course, there's many ways you can run workspaces on FME Flow. Run a workspace page, automation, streams, Flow apps, schedules, and through the REST API. That's a pretty exhaustive list. I think that's every way you can run a workspace. If there's a way I've missed, let me know. It's a pretty big list. And yeah, some of these could be considered batch processing, but not all of them. I just wanted to kind of give a little overview of all the different ways you can run a workspace. In this section, we're going to look at a little bit at the workspace runner and batch deploy. And all of these Flow options are covered in the Flow authoring course. Happens to be happening next week if you're interested. We run that about every other month, so you can check that out if you want to learn more about FME Flow. One way to batch process is to use the workspace runner. Again, using sort of a similar technique as with maybe the feature reader, you can run a workspace every time a feature is sent in to the workspace runner. So you might have a workspace that looks like this, similar to what we were just doing, where you are clipping a raster to neighborhoods. Maybe you want to batch process that. Well, you could get your list of ortho photos and use that to provide the input, basically the input path for the data, to the workspace runner and run that every time a file path is sent in. The workspace runner will run up to 7 concurrent FME processes, and so you can run more than one workspace at a time. One thing to note about this is it does have an option for wait for job to complete. If you have that set to no, it might look like Workspace Runner is incredibly fast because a feature will go in and then a feature will basically come straight out. However, when wait for job is complete is set to no, that's because FME fires up a process and starts running the workspace, but then this workspace continues. So it looks like maybe it might trick you into thinking the workspace ran almost instantly, but all that happened is FME told the workspace to start running, and it's going to go and run it, and then this workspace will continue. If you need to wait for the results of that workspace, you'll have to set wait for job to complete to yes, and then it will wait. Oh, that's an interesting point. If we run concurrent processes, FME will report success even if there is failure. I haven't run into that personally. I'll have to look into that and see if we have a bug filed about that. It does feel like maybe that should be an option, like ignore failures or something. Would you expect Workspace Runner to fail and stop if there was a failure? Because if you have set for Workspace wait for job to complete to no, it wouldn't know actually if it was succeeded or failed, right? So I feel like that would only really happen if you had wait for job to complete set to yes. Here's an example of how Workspace Runner would be set up. Put a path to the workspace. I've already mentioned the wait for job to complete option. And then for the workspace parameters, you can choose what you want. So in this case, we're taking this from a file directory path name reader and using the path for Windows as the source file for that workspace. Is there a way to run concurrent processes and wait to complete? I thought if you have wait for job to complete set to yes, it will wait for all concurrent processes to conclude before proceeding. Is that not the case? Oh, I see. Setting this option prevents multiple, right? It will wait for one. It will do one at a time if you do it that way. Yeah, so Ryan's saying there's a result feature. Do you have to do a feature counter or feature holder with a count and wait for the number of processes? Is that a possibility? I haven't tried that, but maybe that would be a way to do it. Yeah, John. So this is basically just the way that Workbench works. You kind of get 7 engines essentially, right? Like you can run 7 concurrent processes with Workbench on a desktop machine. FME Flow, you have engines. Each engine can run one process. I don't actually know what happens if you send a job to FME Flow with a single engine, but you use a workspace runner. I'm not sure. Not actually sure what happens in that case. Maybe you're able to fire up multiple processes per engine, actually. I'm not clear on that. I'd have to check. You guys have some good questions today. I'm going to make a note of that one. I don't really know how that works on Flow. Right. So you're wondering about doing it on Flow. Yeah, I actually don't know. I would expect it actually probably would work. Yeah, I would expect it would work. So you could run concurrent processes with a single engine, but I'm actually not sure. I guess it would make sense you could, because basically when you're running something on Workbench, you have one version of one instance of FME really. You can just spin up multiple processes. But yeah, I'd have to test that. Something to look into. Oh, Workspace Runner just doesn't work on Flow. That would kind of make sense. Yeah, I think, does it require a local path to the workspace? I guess you could still provide that on a machine. Yeah, I'd have to check that. I don't actually know. Okay, yeah, it says publishing is not recommended to FME Flow, is what it says in the docs. I don't know what that means, though. Another way you can do batch processing is with the batch deploy option in FME Workbench. That's under the Run menu. This allows you to instantly do batch processing or create batch files to use later. The goal behind this basically is if you have one workspace open and you want to run it against multiple files, you can use batch deploy. It operates a bit like a wizard. It walks you through the steps, pick the input and output data sets, and you can add suffixes to the output file names if you want. And then you can either run it immediately or create a batch file, which you can run later. So that's a bit of an overview of batch processing. It does sound like there's quite a bit of an interest in this. So maybe we need to expand this in the future and maybe do some exercises. And I'll look into that, what actually happens if you run Workspace Runner on Flow question. It says it's not recommended. I don't really know what that means. Does it just fail? I don't know. And yeah, I'll also look into that success versus failure issue because that's a good question. Okay, so go ahead and work on that, and we'll come back in a little bit and talk about parallel processing.